Order the meeting of the Dudley Charlton Regional School Committee. Tonight is Wednesday, March 1st, 2023 at 7 p.m. We're at the Charlton Middle School. Can you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we'll take a moment of silence. Okay, we're going to move on. We are at agenda number 3, which is new business, on to the appointment of the Dudley Charlton Regional School District Treasurer, Director Matthew. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. We're going to 2, approval of the warrants. So we have warrants ready to sign, so please feel free to sign them. Now, please go ahead, Director Matthew.
Thank you. I'd like to defer this to the next school committee meeting on March 8th. While we have 2 qualified candidates, the top choice would like to come in and meet with the current treasurer, Carol Barron, and myself before committing fully to the position. We have that meeting scheduled for next Tuesday. If all goes well in that meeting, I'll bring forward that person's name and information to school committee at that point.
Okay, great.
So that would be a table?
We'll table that. Okay, B, proposed part-time accountant, 8 hours per week, Director Matthew?
Thank you. This is in response to the management letter as part of the FY22 audit. They pointed out that our district office, much like the rest of the district, lacks a certain level of resources that are found in other schools and other districts. This is the least impactful financially approach that we can take that will provide a level of response to that audit management letter and provide a little help in the business office with the transition in the payroll position and the extraordinary amount of work that's gone into, the Dudley override and the work coming up for preparing multiple budgets based on multiple scenarios. I think this is a critically important piece to add to district office.
Okay. I would entertain yes.
No,
You don't
I was
need
just
a
going to
motion.
add, so Madam Chair, it is 8 hours per week, and we're looking for the remainder of this school year to manage that. So it's a value of roughly $4,000.
Okay.
Okay?
Do you need a vote? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'd entertain a motion to approve the part-time accountant for 8 hours per week. Do I have a second? Second. Okay. Ms. Costello, do you want to open the conversation? Nope.
No, I think I made it very clear the last time when the auditor was here that we desperately needed somebody in the office to help out.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
So a couple of things that I want to say out loud, make sure that they're in the notes of why we're doing this. One, where's the money coming from to fund the $4,000, Mr. Matthew?
That would be from school choice. The fund has a balance north of $500,000.
Okay. And the second part of this is, my understanding is this is a necessity because we have statutory obligations that are still something that we need to make sure we meet so that we don't have additional findings on additional audits and so that we are appropriately meeting what the state asks of us. And given that we're talking about a double budget and 2 towns, we need to make sure we have enough staff to be able to respond to the community and explain the changes that continue to need to be looked at, given working with 2 different boards of selectmen and 2 different communities. That's correct?
Yes, the workload for business offices, school business offices across the state has not decreased, yet our staffing level has not increased in 25 years.
That's all I had.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything?
That answered my question.
No? Yes, go ahead.
To be fair though, Rich, didn't the district office have a decrease in personnel
Yes.
last year?
Yes, we did cut a district-wide position last year.
Was that in the accounting?
No, the district
Remind
has
me.
not had an accounting position I'm a certified governmental accountant, and I've been able to fill that role, but there's only so many hours, so much time.
Correct.
But respectfully, everybody in district office wears multiple hats, so there's no silos positions in our office. So with the loss of one position, that person could have assisted in some form of that to try to help out in some way. So once again, everyone in district office wears multiple hats and does multiple things.
Correct. Could I just ask, Rich, typically, what would a central office have as far as staffing for an accountant?
It depends on the regional district, but it could range from somebody that's simply part-time to a full-time assistant business official.
Okay.
Again, it all depends on, the particular district. I think in looking at the staffing at various regional schools, it's not going to shock anybody to say that Dudley Charlton trails.
Right.
And again, I'm looking at the least amount of fiscal impact for trying to find a solution here.
Right.
And
Yep.
Madam Chair, as I've stated, I know there are some people who have expressed to me that they're frustrated and tired of hearing this, but once again, out of 319 reporting districts in the state of Massachusetts, Dudley Charlton is the lowest, 319 out of 319, when it comes to the operations of a school district, from the administrative perspective, and that's running our office. So, yeah, everything's relative. Every community has different staff and different positions and different titles, but the reality of Dudley Charlton being 319 out of 319 is why everybody in the district office wears multiple hats, and they may have one title, but that's not their one job.
Right. And excuse me if I did not hear this. We did say how much this would cost us for the year, correct?
Yes, so right around $4,000.
Right around
Yeah,
4,000.
the intention would be a $30 an hour position, which equates out to be roughly a $60,000 a year annual position,
Right.
which is right in line with that type of position.
Right. I don't know how anyone else feels, but I feel like when we're talking about numbers such as saving towns multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think putting $4,000 into a position to support an office to be able to do that seems the correct thing to do. Yeah. Okay. Is there any more discussion? No? Okay, we'll take a vote. All those in favor? Motion passes. Wonderful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
Move-
you very much.
You're welcome. Moving on to new business C, consideration of out-of-state travel overnight trip policy IJOA, and this is for the grade 4 Connecticut Science Center. Typically, we do these as, as the consent agenda items, so I would take a motion to approve the out-of-state travel overnight trip.
So moved. Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion on the trip? Nope. I will just say I had contacted Principal Olson to talk about, there was something about students bringing lunch, and we talked a little bit just to make sure that if a student didn't have a lunch, they would receive a lunch, and so that was what I looked at. But, yep, is there any more discussion? No. Okay.
I'm sorry, who made the motion? Oh, okay, Jamie, yeah.
Jamie.
Yeah.
Okay. All those in favor? Motion carries. Have fun. Great. Okay, and we'll move on to the school committee workshop. And fiscal year 2024, and you are taking
start.
lead on that? Okay,
I'll start.
great.
So, Madam Chair, this is, in school committee, this is a budget workshop for fiscal year '24. I know we've been sharing a lot of information with you as a committee and to the community. We visited with the FAA from Dudley, the Board of Selectmen in Dudley, the FinCom in Charlton. We had the all boards meeting to talk about it as well. There have been a few shifts in the sand, is what I would say. And some of that was shared this past Monday at the Dudley Board of Selectmen FAA joint meeting. So the way we really like to try to frame this workshop, but we'll obviously take the lead of the school committee, is to talk about what those shifts are when it comes to assessments for our two communities, because that information is raw and fresh and came out last Thursday. And Mr. Matthews dedicated his returned from vacation to work on all of that. So he worked all weekend to try to come up with the numbers as with those new assessment figures as to what it would look like for both communities, because there was a difference in comparison to what the Abrams Group presented, because they were going off for estimates or trends and things of that nature. So there has to be a rich discussion here about what those assessment looks like for those two communities now, for Dudley and for Charlton. So we'd like to start with that and then move from there back to our presentations that we shared and kind of exploring a little bit more to creating a budget, a balanced budget if there is an unfavorable vote for the override, and looking for direction on that. So we'll talk about, I believe we'll talk about the assessment, we'll talk about the impact, we'll talk about what we as a district have tried to create to try to mitigate the drastic change for one of our two communities this evening, and then get into, where we are, and again, direction, because we do have a budget hearing next Thursday, and as you heard, the town of Dudley would like to try to get a number next. We have a budget hearing next Wednesday. Dudley would like to try to get to a number next Thursday, which is going to be monumental still for us, because we are creating two budgets with a significant decrease to our operating expenses if it's an unfavorable vote. So I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Matthew to talk about the assessments and again, the shifts in both communities. The request has not changed. There's still a need for us to pay our bills moving into FY24 at $3.6 million. Those numbers have shifted a little bit based off of, what we put on the list the last time we met about the increase in out-of-district tuitions. So that still had the balance to $3.6 million and reduced technology from $300,000 to $75,000. But there's more to it now that we've learned those incredible numbers last Thursday. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Matthew.
Thank you, Superintendent LaMarche. I'll direct school committee to take a look at the two-page budget projected revenue in your packets, where it says total expenses, an increase of $3,659,000.
That one is?
It's the two-page that was in your folder.
It's the memo, not the memo.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to the right, total expenses, 3,659,000. No, that should be 3,6. It's probably the other one.
It's a double-sided,
It's the-
one-page double-sided.
One page double-sided.
There you go. Okay, so this represents the information from the state cherry sheets. As part of the side pieces of paper that you had were the actual cherry sheets from the Commonwealth as released last Thursday. They do represent an increase in Chapter 70 for us of $30 per student. We're able to actually increase our budget by more than that, because there was an appropriation last year that was not 100% confirmed at the time as to whether or not it would be still included in the hold harmless. So we budgeted from charter reimbursement last year in lieu of that. So you can see between the reduction in the charter reimbursement and the increase in Chapter 70, they net out to be about that $30 per student there. Our regional transportation estimate was not increased on this page, but was supposed to be, and that went up to $2,017,339. Most of the revenue, other revenues stayed the same, except for the capital donations. We're running a little behind there, and the rules with DOR are that we should only budget money when we have it in hand. So we need to build that fund back up before we start utilizing it again. So when all's said and done, the assessments have increased dramatically for Charlton. If we could take a look at the Charlton FY '23 and FY '24 Chapter 70 pages. Those were the side handouts. DESI logos on them. I wanted to provide both the FY '23 and FY '24 printouts from the state so that the committee could understand the dramatic increase in the Charlton assessment. The fact that their municipal revenue growth factor, which was really the unknown when information was prepared by the Abrams Group, increased from 1.68% in fiscal '23 to 6.74% in fiscal '24. That was the primary driver in why their minimum local contribution increased so greatly. Taking a look at the FY '24, I believe it's double-sided for you. If we take a look at the back of the FY '24, we see the split between Dudley and Charlton and Southern Worcester County Bay Path with the students. And you can see that from last year to this year, the minimum local contribution for Dudley Charlton Regional Schools from Charlton increased almost $1 million from $11,793,404 to $12,737,000.
2 million, sorry.
I'm sorry.
You said 12 million, 2 million. Oh, I'm sorry.
It increased to
Yeah.
12 million.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
737,269. So that accounts for the dramatic change from the initial projections to the revised projections, indicating Charlton's assessment could go up with our current budget estimate as much as $2.2 million. I did do just a simple comparison at the bottom, the per pupil allocation per state formula, the required contribution. The Dudley Charlton per pupil allocation from the state on the formula is $7,248. The Bay Path number is $10,723, almost 48% difference. So one of the questions that's generally asked when you're looking at a regional school or a local public school versus a vocational school is, well, how can vocational schools get away with charging just the minimum local required contribution? And I think that almost 50% more from the state in their formulary approach helps to explain that. So that's a key factor. So again, we recognize the fact that the initial estimate of 1.9 million was going to be challenging for the town of Charlton, and having it increase to 2.2 million was going to be almost impossible. So again, time spent over the weekend to try to come up with a path forward resulted in the memo, budget message number 2 that school committee has, and a revised assessment pages that could point to a lower assessment for Charlton if we choose to go down that path. But that's something that we will have to talk about.
Do you want to see if they have any questions on that, the assessment? and
I was
stuff?
just wrapping up.
You are a
Yep.
Chapter 70 expert.
I am not a Chapter 70 expert, but I was able to print these off from the website.
Does anyone have any questions about the assessment and the change in assessment? And were you able to see the municipal growth factor go from 1.68 to 6.74 in 1 year, which, again, that was not part of the Abrams Group, and we did not predict that. But that's the main driver between the increased assessment for the community of Charlton.
Does anybody have any questions so far?
Do you want to talk about how that impacts the town of Dudley?
Sure. So what that did allow, or what that does inside of the formula, because the way it works is both communities are required to contribute their minimum local contribution. While Charlton's minimum local contribution increased by close to that $1 million, Dudley's only increased by a couple of $100,000. So Dudley's assessment lowered dramatically with the introduction of these numbers. And it allows the district, and we'll talk about the potential override in Dudley shortly, but it allows us to take our $1.8 million request and lower that to just under $1.3 million. Hopefully providing that much more support for finding a long-term financial solution for both the town of Dudley and the regional assessment in Dudley.
So, Madam Chair, so a point of interest is the Dudley municipal revenue growth factor went from 3.67 last year to 1.55 this year, as a point of reference for there as well. Now, it is a factor in here, but as you know, we're a two-town district, and there's a balance to the assessments and to our budget. So with the increase to Charlton, there's a decrease to Dudley. Any questions on?
That's my question. Does anybody have any questions so far?
I guess I'll ask a question. So if next year, the numbers flip around, and so the municipal revenue growth factor doesn't go up in Charlton, but it were to happen to go up in Dudley, these percentages will shift again, and then they could alter this path forward for next budget year as well. But on the flip side of that, if Charlton's growth continues and Dudley doesn't see growth, the number could be even higher than 6.74% for next year.
Yeah, I'm not going to guess about the municipal revenue growth factor, but there is an absolute impact here. In the past, it's been fairly consistent between both communities. So, I use the number 50-50 just because I like easy math. But, 52-48, 53-47, 54-46, it's been fairly consistent in that range. So you could plan that, the minimum local contributions, Charlton was always going to go up a little bit more than Dudley, but, they would be pretty close to equal with the additional assessments. With the Charlton minimum local contribution spiking as it did in FY24, if that's going to be a continual pattern, then what will happen is, if Dudley's remains low, we're not going to be able to assess Dudley for all of the additional monies that, we have in the override plan, because Charlton, I'm sure, is not going to want to appropriate $2 million on a regular basis for us, as we obviously heard last night as well. So looking into the future, it certainly could very well have an impact going forward, that even though Dudley can now afford a higher level of increase, it may turn out that Charlton can't, because all of the money is being put into the one category of minimum local contribution versus the additional contribution. So it's, that's why when pressed of, well, tell us exactly what the budget is going to be in 3 years, it becomes almost impossible to do that. You can lay out certain factors and certain predictable patterns, but there's absolutely no guarantee whatsoever that you are 100%, going to be able to nail that. So it presents a interesting dilemma and circumstance for everybody involved, and obviously we have work to do in terms of identifying reductions If the override is unsuccessful in Dudley, which would subsequently lower the assessment in Charlton, and conversely, how do we find a number that's palatable? How do we reach a compromise with the town of Charlton? Or, do we go down the path of their voted appropriation from last evening, or recommended appropriation? I did put together, and you have, again, as a side piece of paper, the what would happen if the Charlton desired assessment. In the gray box, it says FY24 budget dash Charlton desired assessment. You can see what that would mean. And that would be a rather substantial budget impact to us, a reduction of around $1.7 million.
But that's counting a successful,
That's
successful
assuming
override.
a successful override in
Correct.
Dudley,
I
which
wanna be clear
is
about that, yeah.
not, by any stretch of the imagination, absolutely guaranteed.
Right, so that if there's a successful override, this, with the, the Board of Selectmen last night supported as of last night, would require us, even with an override, to reduce our budget by $1.7 million. I think what needs to be clear is that the relationship between the two towns is critical. It's a yin and a yang. It goes back and forth. It's a seesaw. It's not as Mr. Matthews says, it's not 50-50. We wish it was 50-50, and we could work on it from that perspective, but one impacts the other, and it goes back and forth. And so when we learned of these numbers last Thursday, we right away had meetings Monday morning in both town halls to discuss this, because we know in Charlton 1.9 million was a struggle, never mind 2.2 million. So we have work to do to bring that 2.2 down, to try to even get into an override in Dudley that could be somewhere acceptable by the community of Charlton. Not today, but how do we get there? We know 2.2 is a non-starter. $2.2 million assessment is a non-starter. We know 1.9 was already feeling like a non-starter in every way. So 2.2 is definitely a non-starter. And this is all based off of a successful override in Dudley. So that's why we have the memo, which we can get into, but I just want to continue to make sure that we give the opportunity to talk about these assessments and the yin and the yang and the seesaw, and the incredible work between the two communities to try to bridge all of this together for what we know is Dudley Charlton Regional School District.
Do we have any questions so far?
We know it's a lot of numbers at you, but it's a lot of work and crunching and, assessments and trying to build these and construct these so that all the numbers tie out and all that kind of stuff. It's an incredible amount of work, because when we do go from each town to each town, we keep rebuilding, because one affects the other. We just keep going back and forth. So we can't I wish we could just create one for Dudley, and if that's what it is, and one for Charlton, that's what it is, and we move on from there, but we can't. Through all of the decision-making and amalgamations of thoughts and all that kind of stuff that happens through all the boards.
Can I just ask a question about the timelines again? I'm worried that we have these different timelines that we're not going to meet, and we're not going to have enough information for Dudley next week based on, we need to talk to Charlton about, are they really going to, how are we going to come up from 1.3? Because 1.3 just isn't going to work.
From the administrative office perspective, and feel free to jump in, this work is going to happen all the way through every event that's coming up, whether it's a vote, Board of Selectmen meeting, to town meeting. I don't see a resolution happening on April 1st to say this is where we're going to go, and we're all in agreement, because it's such a, April 25th is a telling date. That's the ballot question in Dudley.
Right.
And so we move from there to the next thing. So this work will continue, if not daily and nightly, from now until town meetings.
Okay.
So if I could chime in as well. In some ways, as long as school committee presents to Dudley And if you want, we can talk about the Dudley override now, or we can do it in a little bit. But as long as we present to them their high watermark, we really have 3 columns that we're asking for within the override in Dudley. The first is the operational piece, obviously, and that's the most critical, that's the budget itself. The second piece is the feasibility study, and the third piece is the override amount to pay down capital. So if the assessment to Dudley goes down, that money can simply shift over into the override amount for capital. So they'll be paying more capital down than the original plan. But as long as we set it at the high water mark, and I don't think we want to increase our budget by more than $3.665 million. We have the House numbers, so, you know, the calculation that's on the sheet for DCRSD override analysis 3123 represents the Dudley assessment increase overall.
That's the smaller print sheet.
A lot of columns to fit in there.
Oh, boy.
Can I make just a clerical request? Because this is going to continue to change and evolve, and we are going to need information on Dudley, information on Charlton, information on if an override is successful, if it's not, maybe we could just color code the paper next time or something, or like, I don't know, take a highlighter and color code, look for the one with the green dot or something, but there's a lot of information, and because we didn't have the benefit of looking at it ahead of time, I feel like it's just confusing to figure out where we're at, and that's my suggestion on how to fix it for the next time.
Well received, but I don't believe that we'll have the 72 different variations after the public hearing next week.
Okay.
We'll certainly have different versions, but it will be very clear. Option A, option B, option C.
Okay.
And if I could, through the chair, this is all around assessment. This is not around our budget. Unless school committees thinks that 3.6 million to pay our bills is not the right addition to our budget for an override, and feels that 2.7, somewhere in the neighborhood of reducing 2.7 is more of our budget. That isn't tied into this. This is tied into the assessments and working with the 2 towns to figure out where their landing spots are based off of the approved budget by the school committee. Which again, the presentation of the fiscal year 24 budget hasn't changed. There have been some adjustments to it. Slight adjustments. It's just shifting of the money to pay the bills, because again, keep in mind that we've presented a couple of times now that FY24, the reason why there's an increase of $3.6 million to our budget is to pay bills for contractual obligations, employee benefits, utilities, transportation, asset transition, restoration, out-of-district tuitions, and some technology. Those things haven't changed unless school committee's going to give us direction to say, no, we're not going to, instead of paying for out-of-district tuitions, you know, you can't say that, but instead of doing this, instead of doing contractual obligations, we're going to do this instead. So those things, our budget hasn't changed. It's what we're trying to really try to shape here is the work with the 2 towns to try to get to their assessments. But again, it is in school committee's hands to set a budget number, 2 budget numbers, one with the $3.665 million increase to it, and one with the $2.7 million decrease to it. I don't know if that helps the explanation a little bit more.
Would you like us to make a motion?
No, there's no motion.
No.
Sorry.
For what?
No, we're in a workshop.
Yeah, I forgot.
Getting back to the override in Dudley for a moment. So after a meeting today to help finalize these numbers, if we take a look at the sheet with the very small print, DCRSD override analysis, the school portion of the override is $3,172,924. And again, it may shift from one column to the next depending on the actions that school committee takes. But that would provide us with, again, if successful, funding from Dudley for budgetary increases in the range of $1 million a year over the next few years. That's far different than the message that we've been that I've heard for the last 7 years of 2.5% increase. And you can actually see what that turns out to be here. A 2.5% increase on our assessment. You know, if we're getting $1 million in state aid additional, then yes, getting $244,000 from Dudley works out, because it gives us, you know, that 3% type budget increase. But, you know, over the last few years, with state aid being very, very minimal, and the district being a hold harmless district, meaning the state believes that it pays us too much Chapter 70, those types of increases have led to some of the challenges that we face here. The town's amount is $1,808,192. So the potential total override, although I have a dollar discrepancy with the Abrams Group, I'm not going to lose sleep over a dollar, totals $4,981,116. So as long as school committee is comfortable with proceeding with that number, with our number for the override, again, recognizing that it may shift from the operating to paying down capital, but as long as school committee is comfortable with that number, then, you know, at the meeting in Dudley a week from tomorrow, that would be the expectation, that they're approving an override of $4.98 million.
So, Madam Chair, I think it would be helpful for us to talk about what school committee action needs to come forward. You know, we're not taking action today because it's a workshop, but there are a couple of votes that are going to have to come forward. From the top, one of the votes is going to be for a fiscal year '24 budget. So that's going to be the increase of the 3.665 on the total budget, which, as presented, is going to be, I don't have it here, but that's going to be the over $50 million. Another vote is going to be on a unfavorable vote override budget, which is a budget that's 2.765 less than the FY24 budget number. And then school committee will vote on a request for the town of Dudley for an override, correct? Now, you mentioned that they're voting on options, or they're voting on the actual, the big number for the override?
It's really the big number that we need to proceed forward with. Again, depending on where we end up with the final assessments, with the final budget number, some monies may shift from the assessment column into the capital column.
So final assessment numbers not with the towns, with the state, right? Well, it's the town too in there, but so far we have the cherry sheets, we don't have all of the legislative bodies' budgets to understand that, so that could be a little bit of a shift as well.
Right, we don't know if the House budget will increase revenues for us that we might use to help lower assessments. We don't know where any of that stuff is, because the House isn't gonna vote until April, the Senate won't vote until May. Conference committee may or may not have something available in June. Typically, it's July before the budget is actually finalized. But again, I think the one thing that we need to leave with tonight is school committee comfortable requesting the 3.172924 override amount in Dudley, which would be the high water mark of the assessments, plus money for the feasibility study, plus money for the capital, recognizing that they may shift between columns.
Yeah. Comfortable is one thing, voting's another thing, so yeah, hopefully you walk away with some comfort around it, but we will need a vote on the override for the town of Dudley. That's why I'm trying to explain what the votes are that need to come forward.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I guess my concern is that I've always felt that we had to give Dudley our budget, and that would be the 1.8 million increase, correct? That's the budget that we would like to do.
That's the assessment.
No, that changed. When the state numbers were released, because the Charlton's required local contribution increased so much, Dudley's assessment for next year, even at our high watermark of budgetary, changed from 1.8 million down to The
1.3.
1.2.
1.2.
Yeah, 1.3, 1.2.
Yeah. So those are the numbers that Rich has been trying to crunch to prepare for this.
Right.
So that's why, yes, that's a factor in this, but that factor in this for school committees to vote on what the override would look like. So that's why the override, if you recall, we were talking about an override with the town, a multi-year override of being in excess of
Right.
over $5 million. It's below $5 million now.
Okay, I guess, and this is me speaking, not the committee, but, I mean, I have a hard time telling Dudley how to tell the Dudley selectmen how to decide on their override. Like, I don't mind saying, here, this is what we need for our budget, this is what we need, but isn't it their job to decide
Well,
what
it begins
the?
with your vote on the number
It begins with our vote on the budget.
and the request for an override, a portion of the override for the schools.
Okay, I didn't realize we had to vote on that.
Well,
Right,
You don't need to vote tonight. We have a meeting next week. We're going to have a public hearing, and, you can certainly vote the number then.
okay.
But I do want to let them know that, this looks like the path we're going down, if at all possible. If it's not, then we'll just let them know.
I just have a question. When you say we have to vote the override, what does that mean? We vote a number?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So you're not saying we vote.
You vote to seek an override with the community of Dudley at this value.
Okay.
And with this, you can say with this plan, that's why I was asking the question about, you're really not voting on the plans, but Mr. Matthews presented a couple times now that there were multiple options for this. We've worked with the community of Dudley from the administrative perspective, and we have attended the meetings. And right now, we're still being guided to provide a multi-year figure for the community of Dudley, for the schools and with the town. So the schools have a piece of that, so we have to provide them with a finite number to move towards the override for this, that represents the schools.
Okay, one more clarity here then.
Yep.
So it sounds to me like we're gonna vote on, this is how much money we believe we need as a district to operate our schools. And then we are going to say, if the override is unsuccessful, then this is the other number, less what the override would bring in, that we are going to vote in as a budget.
Correct.
So there's two votes.
Yes.
And the reason for that is because we need a plan, and then we need a, for lack of a better term, backup plan if the override does not pass.
Regardless, we are required to present and have a balanced budget based off of what the towns will contribute to us.
Correct, and we can't know what they will contribute until the voters go to the polls and make a decision.
We keep learning along the way, but yes, that's a telltale vote, is April 25th.
Thank you.
But the town needs to know what the school committee's number is for the requested override.
So I guess do you have a question, Jamie?
No, I don't know. I'm just trying to work it all out.
Mhm.
I guess, so we would be voting to say that the 3.172924 number is what we need to go towards Dudley's override, and that's just the information that they're going to get, and then they're also going for operational override too, right? So that's just part of their puzzle that they're going to bring to their meeting on April 25th, or for their vote?
No, a week from tomorrow.
Well, right, so,
Well, that's their goal. Their goal is next
right, to have it
next
for that
Thursday,
meeting.
yes.
But then that information will be taken for them to then vote to actually have an override.
Yeah, they need our number to,
Yes.
because it's a combined override. It's not a school override and a town override. It's a combined override for the community of Dudley.
All right, so that's one number to present. And then we also still have to dive into if we have a catastrophic no vote and what we have to do to decimate our budget, basically to work with less money.
I guess I don't understand why we have to vote that next week. If we are saying this is what we need, this is what we need to survive, why then do we have to vote the lower budget?
You don't have to vote the lower budget. I'm not asking you to vote the lower budget. I'm asking you to approve this number to go forward for the override.
But Steve's telling you,
They have to vote on the budget, too.
Yes, but we don't have, I think the confusion is we don't have to vote on both versions, option A, override successful, option B, override not successful next week. We're not asking for that. We're presenting information about option B, override not successful. We've presented that. We'll talk about that tonight. We'll continue to talk about what happens to the district if the override is not successful. But the town needs a number from the schools to proceed forward with setting its ballot vote. The vote was originally scheduled for March 20th and got changed up to March 9th. So at the March 8th meeting, school committee, it would be my recommendation that we continue along with the $3.665 million increase, and that's what these numbers represent, and have further conversations with the town of Charlton to see, again, if we can reach a compromise or where Charlton will drive that number. And of course, we have all the other factors of the House budget, the Senate budget, and the final budget.
My only position, which is slightly different, and I don't disagree that you don't have to vote on the lower budget, but we really need to, for messaging, we really need to identify what the reductions will be. If we don't vote on a lower budget, then we're still letting part of that hang out there, that this could be, it could be this or it could be that. So, yeah, I don't disagree that you don't have to vote on the lower budget, but we really have to have a strong sense for messaging for the override, what a failed override will do and how it will impact. We can go off the generalizations that we have there, that we haven't, that we've put forward for school committee to give us some feedback on, athletics, stipends, department heads, interscholastic sports, all that kind of stuff, but class size. But I think if school committee desires to let all that hang out as it could be any one of these, and I get concerned with that being a mixed message for voters, that's all.
Caitlin?
I have to agree, after watching part of the Board of Selectmen meeting in Dudley, all the departments had to come forth with a 10% reduction. So they've already decided what they would eliminate with a failed override. So I feel like we also need to do the same by coming up with a budget
So
with a
again,
failed override.
Right, so I agree. You don't necessarily have to vote on a
We
budget
have to-
that's
Reduced by $2.7 million.
reduced by $2.7 million. I was going to try to use the bigger numbers, but reduced by $2.7 million, but we really need to know what that will actually do.
And I think that's going to help the Board of Selectmen, if the override fails, determine how they appropriate their money, because they're hearing from every department, and every department is basically at bare minimum already.
Right.
So they have to have a plan in place too of where their money is going to go with a failed override. So from my perspective, the Board of Selectmen do want a budget both ways.
I'm concerned, and what I'm hearing from people in Dudley is that, I'm concerned that we're asking for more than just what we need in this year's budget, in our override. Do I think we need the 3.172? Yes, but do I feel like that's gonna pass? I don't know.
So my sense is that everyone I've spoken to, and again, I'm biased because who do I speak to? Parents, teachers. So
Right.
they are all comfortable with this number. However, now we have new figures. We do have wiggle room with this number. However, we also have options that if Charlton cannot meet our preferred budget, we can still, if this passes, use it towards our capital.
I just don't understand why we would not debt service our capital and put it into an increase in people's taxes right now.
Well, ideally, we wouldn't. We would use this towards our operating, but if Charlton is unable to meet that, then it's not like this money we ask for and then we can't even use it because of the regional agreement. So there's options. We do have wiggle room if we want to move this number, but I hate to move that number when so many are confident this would pass already.
As an entire override, not
Right.
just schools.
Right.
For the
Right.
community of Dudley.
Yeah.
If I may.
Yes.
We were tasked or requested from the town of Dudley to come up with a solution to provide funding to the district for multiple years.
Okay.
In order to do that, unfortunately, Mass General Law and the Prop 2.5 guidance does not allow for one single question with multiple years. If it did, we would not do the capital approach that we're doing here. We're doing the capital approach here to increase the levy limit, and then in subsequent years, take that money and put it into a stabilization fund dedicated to the future Dudley Charlton assessments, and draw off that money in future years. If school committee does not want to do that, we can certainly, absolutely lower our request by $1.4 million. But we're going to be back doing this again next year. And we're not going to have the town departments, assuming a successful vote this year, we're not going to have the town departments supporting us as well. We're going to be out there by ourselves.
Right. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I'm just saying, you're talking to certain people. We've had people, the elderly are equally concerned about their electricity bills being doubled and gas bills being doubled, and there's people that are not making the ends meet right now. And if we go and increase their taxes, I think we just have to be careful about it. But if this is something that the town of Dudley has asked us to do, then okay.
Again, it's the only way of creating a funding source for future assessments. We looked at, could we not put it in stabilization and just leave it as excess capacity on the levy limit? And that was a whole 2-day educational process, including phone calls with the DOR to make sure that everybody involved understood all of the ramifications and potentials there. We talked to the town of Dudley about, does a 1-year solution make sense? And again, it seemed to be, no, let's try to go for the multi-year solution. And as far as I can see, and I've only spent hundreds of hours on this so far, this is the appropriate path for us to take.
Yeah. Thanks.
I've heard from my neighbors, some of who work in the district, that it's a lot of money. It's a big impact on taxes, but they understand. And I've heard from other folks, my God, Rich, what are you doing to us? And
Right.
I said, I'm not really doing anything. I'm going to state the absolute obvious thing. Nobody likes to pay taxes. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. But if the state isn't coming to our aid, yes, of course, we could ask just for a 1-year solution, but then we're right back to where we've been the last 7 years without a multi-year solution. This would provide a multi-year solution.
So, Ms. Matthew, I want to be clear, this includes the memo regarding Charlton's assessment that's in the packet tonight, right? This value?
No, if the school committee wants to enact those assessment changes, then the amount in the operating column would shift over to the capital column.
Right, so they're not acting on anything tonight, but I just wanted to make sure that we're going to get to the memo regarding, because again, we're confident we can't go to Charlton for a $2.2 million assessment. We're confident of that. So we have to figure out a way to lower that assessment, but that also impacts Dudley as well. So that's what we're talking about. That impact to Dudley will move it to capital.
Rich, can you just say that sentence you just said again? What changes if we enact these?
So on the override sheet, the column titled Override Amount Operating includes $34,158 to make up the FY23 assessment. The total of $1,272,924 would be reduced, and however much it's reduced, that amount would shift over to the column called Override Amount Capital. So let's say it reduced by $200,000 down to $1,072,000. The override capital amount would be $1.6 million. So again, prepaying a bill, not financing that particular bill, that much additional money.
That being what was previously passed for capital, more specifically the roof at Dudley Middle School.
Yep.
Okay, is there a way, and I'm going to say it out there because people are going to ask me why I didn't ask, right? Is there a way, if this number shifts down, that we can take it off the override amount?
Of course, we could
Okay.
absolutely do that. We could lower the amount, and if that's what school committee wants to do next Wednesday, that's perfectly fine. Okay, but next Thursday is when when
Right.
the Board of Selectmen
Right.
need a final number.
Yeah.
So whether it's this or a reduced amount, just remember, once you make a commitment of going down, you can't go back up.
Right.
Not because it's illegal, but for the political, and obviously, since we're dealing with an override situation, that number needs to be put onto a ballot officially,
Right.
and the intention is to do that next Thursday.
Right.
But also keep in mind, by going down, it means that we're trying to lower the assessment to the town of Charlton, and that's what avails itself to lower this value here.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yep,
That's what I mean. Yeah.
that's the yin and the yang.
Okay. Okay. And we do not know the impact to taxes yet, correct?
Well, actually, if you look at the bottom of the sheet there, levy impact so based on the FY '23 levy in
Yeah.
the town of Dudley of $13,588,539, this would represent a 36.66% increase.
Okay.
That is substantial. It's down from where it was previously, because the base numbers have come down. But again, that's why people are concerned about that, and legitimately so.
Right.
That is a substantial increase in taxes. But it is not as if the town of Dudley isn't aware of what these percentages look like. And, again, there were many conversations over the past month since our joint meeting here on February 1st.
Right. Right. Okay. Where else are we on the?
Ms. Stella, there's a quiz at the end?
I apologize.
No, I'm just joking.
I don't know that any of us are going to pass.
I'm just joking.
I would hope.
Do you have anything else?
No, again, there was a lot of discussion around the assessment, about the override for Dudley. Again, we're gearing it towards next week to look at a vote for the override, which is tied into the overall budget. And so now we can get into the Charlton impact and talking about the $2.2 million new assessment for Charlton and the memo that Mr. Matthew included in here to try to continue to work with one of our communities to bring that $2.2 million assessment down. So, did everyone have a chance to read the memo that was in there, in your file? The one dated February 28th?
While people are reading that, I just want to, Mr. LaFerrier, did you want to make any statements tonight, or would you rather wait till next week? Tonight? Okay,
Tonight.
that's perfect. What I'll do is I'll have you speak like after D, is that okay? Come up, because we'll just open the floor to anybody. Thank you.
So there is no action this evening, but this is the plan to try to lower the assessment in the community of Charlton. So, again, $2.2 million was striking, jaw-dropping. So this is an effort to bring the assessment back down to $1.9 million. These are reductions that we're going to ask the school committee to take action on next week to do that, if the school committee chooses to bring that assessment down. We're really scraping across our district to try to make this work. So we have a reduction of 60 hours. I'll read the items. We have a reduction of 60 hours from custodial staff, which is, again, very difficult to do. It may be a 1.5 full-time equivalent, or maybe 10 hours. We have to continue to work on that and what that will look like. Eliminate department heads at Shepherd Hill. Again, this is one of the items that was on the list for guidance from school committee, but with that, again, $2.2 million, we're really in a position where we have to make this recommendation to you as a committee to try to bring Charlton's assessment from $2.2 to $1.9 million. Now, my hope is that this is temporary, or it can be restructured in some way in the future, but this is a value of $200,000 for the Dudley Charlton Regional School District. And then eliminate one grade 8 section at Dudley Middle School. The current grade 7 has 6 sections. The grade 8 has 7, so this would it would be equitable from one year to the next, 6 to 6 the following year. And then there are additional fiscal management moves. We believe that we'll have a charter school reimbursement of $70,000. That came out on the initial cherry sheet, but again, with the way the budget process works through the House Ways and Means and the Senate, that could be adjusted up or down. And then to use, which is a risk, we're already using quite a bit of E&D funds for our operating budget, but to put in an additional $200,000 from E&D, which again will continue to decrease E&D, but if there's a successful override, we believe that this is manageable. For a successful multi-year override, we believe this could be manageable moving forward, but this would be our recommendation to, again, there's no way we're going to get a $2.2 million assessment in Charlton. We have to try to bring it down. These are the actions that we're recommending for school committee to consider next week to be able to do that. And so this changes a combination, total of $600,000 reduction, and it would lower Charlton's assessment to $1.9 million, and Dudley's assessment would be in the range of $1 million. So that does change the override, and that's what Mrs. Cavagnani, that's what you're talking about with whether we're going to capital. We just reduced the number from 4.9 to 4.7 for the override. So that's it in a nutshell, but we'd be happy to answer questions that you may have. These are all unpleasant, but all the reductions that we're trying to make across our district have been unpleasant for a couple of years now.
I'd just like to say, again, any reductions to a district such as ours with significant financial struggles is tough, but I really struggled with recommending the addition of revenues. But again, the goal of the historic goal of school committee here has been to preserve jobs, to preserve class size, to prevent layoffs and those sorts of things, to minimize the impact on the classroom. And we have been moderately successful, I guess, in doing that. But when you chip away at the edges over the course of many, many years, there are no more edges to chip away from ultimately. So I didn't want to make any sort of recommendation to school committee that would have, just sheer reductions or increase of class size to 25, 26, 27, or anything along those lines. So if you don't cut your expenses, the only thing you can do is increase your revenues. And I would prefer that we not have to go down this road, but it's clear that we have to. It's clear that we have to. And, if somebody else, if you have other thoughts of where we can get the 270,000, please, I'd prefer not to have to increase our revenues using this, but I don't see another path forward, unfortunately. But this goes against every grain in my body, and it goes against school committee's stated budget goals for FY24 of reducing our use of E&D.
Does anybody have any questions, thoughts? Go ahead, Caitlin.
So the first 3 items would reduce the assessment to Charlton by just over 300,000. So bringing that 2.2 down to 1.9.
Well, the overall reduction to assessments is $600,000.
Oh, okay.
So, again, roughly 53.7% and 46.3%.
So all 5 of these things would have to happen. Okay.
Yeah, again, the way the regional budget works is it's shared
Right.
pluses and minuses. It's not just specific for one town, except when we talk capital.
I have a couple questions. Custodial staff, are we talking about, after school time? Or are we talking about during the school day? we talking about extra shifts at night to cover extra
As I s-
activities?
As I state in the memo, what this will look like exactly is unclear at this point in time. Okay, whether we shave hours from a number of staff members, whether we eliminate a full-time staff member, we have to work with the district administration to figure out what this is going to look like.
Okay. Can you remind me again how many staff members we added due to COVID
We didn't
For
add any-
custodial?
We didn't add
You
any
mean through ESSER
permanent.
funds?
through ESSER funds, or we didn't add anybody, right?
We had additional staff working that first year back through the
Okay.
COVID relief funds, but they were not permanently added, and they
Okay.
left the district on June 30th of that
Okay.
year.
I'm sorry, when you said staff, I was thinking overall. You were talking about
No, I was
custodial
just talking
staff.
about custodial staff.
Yeah,
I,
So
That was-
so we are back down to pre-COVID levels.
Yes.
okay. I just think all of these are terrible. And not that, obviously, you
Again,
don't want to make them either. I
yeah,
I look at custodial and I think about how we kept hearing that we were able to keep, how we were able to keep Shepherd Hill for so much longer than its lifespan because we had such a dedicated custodial staff that worked they're extremely hard to make sure it looked presentable and cutting hours, and it's just so hard to think that. I would much rather, and I hate to say it, we have class size at 22. I'd much rather see a class size at 24 than reduce. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Because I think the cleanliness of your buildings is the health of your teachers and the health of your students.
Well,
I don't know, and-
Again, I'm going off of the historic approach that the previous school committees have taken. If the school committee has a different view,
I don't know
I'm happy
what
to
everybody
adapt.
thinks.
Well,
I have to concur with that. With the work that they have done to keep the bones going on the schools is amazing. Especially with all the work with the rain and the roofs and Shepherd Hill. And it does affect the class
Yes.
to have the building be in good shape. You can't tell me custodians don't affect the classroom in some way.
I think we're all going to agree.
Yeah.
But keep in mind through our budget process, and if there is an unfavorable vote, class size is still on as an option. So
I know.
if you're not choosing the custodian to get a childhood assessment down, you're choosing class size, and custodial support may go on that list to an unfavorable vote. So I just, it's all in play. This is all in play.
Right. Right.
Can I ask a question while we're talking about custodial staff before we move on? Does our current budget pay for our custodial staff outside of school hours, like Kathy asked? And if so, is there ways that we can use the fees that we collect for events, for people that rent out our schools, to support some of this reduction we need to put in place?
No,
And
fees charged already offset the overtime income that custodians receive for opening the building.
Especially weather events or other things as well. And they help balance that budget.
Okay.
I'm going to ask another question since we're talking about that topic. How often do we look at the fees that we charge for outside people coming in or outside events, and is that something that we could look to increase as a way to support maintaining the services that we provide?
The minimal amount of money that we receive from non-town groups, because we do not charge town groups, really is not going to matter much here.
It helps. It helps, especially overtime. If we have 6 weather events, it helps offset those costs. But it's any fee-based system that we have within a public school district never pays for the entire thing. It may impact it a little bit more, like athletics is a great example, but it will never pay for the entire program of athletics for fees. And nobody would ever participate if you charge what it would cost to offset the entire cost. Same thing with facilities use. We don't have a lot of facilities use beyond our communities. And school committee can always enact a change in the policy. That was my first year here. We worked on the policy for that. We tried to prioritize the groups and how we schedule inside our community. So if school committee wants to charge youth sports to use our facilities to pay for custodians, that's your purview to do that.
But just to follow up, Mrs. Terry, on your question, I'm not sure when the actual dollar fees themselves have been examined, so I'll see if I can find that out, and I'll also do a little comparison shopping with neighboring districts to see, where we're at with that.
Thanks. I'm not saying I want to charge anybody outside of our district. I don't want to charge anybody more, but I also, that's a service that's being provided versus the education base that we are trying to provide to our students.
Yeah, but again, I just want to try to share some clarity. There isn't a lot of external groups. There isn't, Bay Path University is not coming here and renting half of our school to try to provide classes for their students. It's not. We have minimal outside groups renting our facilities.
Right, but how much, I guess, my question is how many town groups use our facilities, like on the weekends, that might incur like double time or overtime charges that we are now incurring? Like, that is a number I'd love to know.
No, we charge even town groups for custodial time, but we don't charge them a facility rental fee.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant that you didn't charge them for custodial time. Okay.
No, that has to get paid somehow.
That's what I was
Yeah, no,
thinking
no.
that we were paying for that.
We're
Okay.
we're nice, but we're not that nice.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense
We
now.
just don't have the money.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you another question. Number 2 on the list that you've provided here talks about department heads at Shepherd Hill, all but guidance. I'm looking at page 10. Thank you for putting page numbers on this presentation of the presentation for the budget, and that was without the override numbers that you had put forth to us. And so the top slide talks about what the administrative team determined would have to be cuts, and then the second slide, I believe, is the list that you provided to us, the school committee, to try to get that additional $580,000 clarity
Yep.
of where that would come from. On this, it says 249,000. So where's the difference to the 200,000? And is that to try to provide some level of support?
No, that was actually teasing the whole thing out in more graphic detail. With those, we're trying to give you what the value is. Remember, department heads is a captured savings as well, because you're populating back in, department heads back into the master schedule as well. So it wasn't an easy number to just say, on day one, this is $249,000.35. So teasing it out and saying, and getting to the point where we needed to really reduce it, it created this value of $200,000. And that's still our guess based off of, because remember, the schedule's not done. We still have to wait for course selections and student interest to see what that will look like and how department heads will plug back into the schedule. Could it be a little bit more? Maybe. But we're more confident in a $200,000 value than we are in a $249,000 value as of March 1st, 2023.
So I'm going to follow this up again. So taking away these department head positions at Shepherd Hill could have major impact on course selection offerings for the future years if we don't have department heads in those roles planning what the offerings would look like. Is that correct?
What it really does is it shifts the work of the department heads onto the administration and the director of the department head for guidance. So it's a lot of administrative work.
Can I say a couple things on that, though?
Yeah. Yeah.
And just speaking from, I have been a department chair, I have been, assistant principal, in a building, obviously, my district is different, but in my district, with our department chairs, we utilize our department chairs as coaches, as leaders, as leaders of that building. And I'm concerned that we're getting rid of them only because you need curriculum experts. We talk about how our special needs students are not reaching high levels in math and English, and they're not even reaching the meets expectation marks. And then we're going to take away people that could go in and coach those teachers on how to improve. And that's what scares me.
Madam-
And then that would have to be absorbed by by the principal and the assistant principals, is what you're
Yep.
saying?
Yep. So, Madam Chair, nobody's going to disagree.
Right.
But
I know.
if it's not that, what is it? Is it class size, sports, or music? I mean, or stipends. I mean, that's where we're really trying to get to.
I just
We all
want-
agree that department heads are crucial to the program that we have.
I am not saying it against you.
No, I'm not saying you are.
I want the public to understand what we're losing,
Yeah,
because that's significant.
yeah. So,
And how do you ever get it back?
so also, if school committee wants to go to Charlton for 2.2, then we're okay with that too. We'll support that and work with the town of Charlton to try to make 2.2 work so that we don't have to make this additional $600,000 reduction.
I mean, I think we heard clearly that they're not able to get to 2.2 last night.
So my concern is, this brings us to 1.9, and their sand line in the sand was 1.3. So we still have potential work ahead of us.
1.3 doesn't seem reasonable. I mean,
I agree with you. I'm not debating that, but I
But this
don't,
is- This is, respectfully, through the chair, this is a starting point
right,
to signal that we know 2.2 is a non-starter.
right.
And so how do we start working away from that? And that's what we're really trying to do. Again, there's no action tonight, but we're trying to prepare a
Yeah,
school
yeah.
committee to try to get there. If school committee wants to lower 1.9 even further, we've tried to provide you categories unless, again, we're not saving the best options in a draw somewhere. If people have other ideas, we'll take them on how to make this assessment work. But we're in a hard place. We've got the override in Dudley, and we've got the increased assessment to Charlton. You know, we all thought from the beginning the perfect storm was feasibility, but override, and possible MSBA moving forward. The perfect storm now is the two communities and how we're going to bridge them together for a fiscal '24 budget alone, never mind what the next couple of years are going to look like for the District of Dudley Charlton Regional School.
I just think to say one more thing about the meeting last night and the money, the number that was provided out publicly. I'm going to try to be careful with my comments here, but I feel strongly that we are presenting a budget that will give us level services. We are now tonight coming and saying we are not going to be able to do that because Charlton cannot meet those level service requirements to be level service funded. We can't put ourselves at a 1.3 and decimate this district, because it will have impact straight through to Charlton, to Dudley, to our home values. People will leave, and if we think that we need to fund those other departments now, when we have less people in our communities, that burden will get heavier. It will not get lighter. And we will be pushing families to take their children out of our district because they will not be able to be served at the educational level that they need to be.
I agree with you 100%. I've already had people tell me that.
Yeah.
If the override fails and this budget passes, the failed override budget, they will move. They have already spoken to realtors, they will move.
Absolutely.
So I don't blame people either.
This if I shouldn't, but, yeah, I don't know.
So I, obviously I feel the same way, and I think this is a lot, and being on this committee for the first time, actually sitting through this budget, and listening to Board of Selectmen speak, I'm wondering, it sounds like maybe they're looking for something as we did, as was presented last year. I mean, we heard them last night, we know where we need to be, we know we're not gonna be able to get there. Do we have different tiers of places we can go? Like last year was the Plan ABC, or however that was presented, and at least they had options and were able to actually see the impact and the differences. I feel like maybe that might help, but I don't know. Just putting it out there.
I was going to say that I think that there were only two options, because back when we had a similar workshop in the summertime, we came together as a committee and made it clear that we wanted to keep our service is leveled. And so Dudley has recognized that they've been able, or haven't been able to provide the amount of money that we need in order to level service. And so they came up with a solution. So our two budgets that we've come up with, the two numbers are an override pass and override fail. That's why there's no middle ground, because we thought that was the issue, was Dudley not being able to provide. Of course, now we have the added problem with the assessment changing because of the growth in Charlton. However, in some ways, that shouldn't have come as a shock. We knew there was growth in the town, which was going to affect the state aid. I mean, even the Abrahams group didn't expect this much, but we should have expected some, right? So that's why there's not a middle ground, because our goals and our brainstorming was what encompassed that. This other budget is what encompassed everything we wanted. So that's why there's not a third option. I mean, we're trying to make one, but this is part of making one, and it's already terrible. So
I have a question about the options that you provided us. When I look at when I go to page 10 of our presentation, and we talked about, without the override, all the different, the administrative team recommendations about the cuts that would need to happen, then I'm just surprised that we went to the secondary level of cuts that you needed to ask us about. Like, department chairs originally were on the list of, you guys tell us what you want to cut. But yet, the initial list without the override wasn't on here. So I didn't know if you want to speak to that at all.
We don't know where else to go. We're trying to make a recommendation. If you want us to recommend to you as a committee that we want to increase class size and leave department heads on there, we could do that. We don't know where else to go. We could recommend that we were going to cut athletics and leave department heads on there. But listening to the feedback we received from you as a committee, department heads were never spoken about as far as concerns or, so we took that feedback from the last committee meeting to really take a look at, we had non-starter is half-day K. That was clear.
That was not voted on.
I'm not saying it was voted on.
Okay.
We listened to feedback.
That was definitely spoken about with many people. I definitely get that.
Yeah,
But
same thing with kindergarten paras, and we also heard from, about athletics, but again, we're willing to we're willing to take your direction. If you want us to put one of those back on and put, as a potential reduction that you want to recommend for us, we'll put department heads back on the list. We're trying to do the best we can with what we have left to try to recommend for reductions to lower the assessment in Charlton. And I just wanted to point out, the question about the three, sorry, because I was looking this up, the three options. Keep in mind that Charlton we gave three options. The first one was a level service budget, then there was one with reductions, then there was one with drastic reductions. Charlton supported a level service budget last year. They went for the higher number.
they did.
Out of the three options. So I'm not, respectfully, are they asking us to give them more reductions that they want to pick on this year? I don't know exactly what they're looking for, but they supported a level service budget last year, and that's all we're asking for this year is a level service budget. So I just wanted to point that out.
No, I appreciate the clarification.
Yep.
Seems fair, it's just unfortunate that it's gone up so much and then
Yeah,
that's the way.
it's reality. And
Everything
It's
is
not just
going.
us. Again, I talked about there was a survey, I think it's up to 77 districts. A little less than half of the districts are looking for, need an override for their operating expenses that responded to the survey. They're not all going to get it, but it's quite telling that out of 77 districts that responded to a survey, that almost half of them need some type of infusion of operating expenses and costs. I don't know the details of that, it's just a generalization, but yeah. Yeah.
I want to make one more comment about last night's meeting versus where we're at now. I feel like we have a great deal of information in front of us, and more is going to be forthcoming and developed and information out to the public. And I feel like the way that 1.3 was determined last night was sitting around a table just discussing things without understanding the direct impacts of what that looks like to our district. And I feel like a better approach would probably be to say, hey, we think we can support 1.7, and what will that reduction do to your budget? Just like they would ask any other department in that community, just like Dudley asked, show us what a 10% reduction in your budget, every single budget of the community would look like. And I feel that we need to get to that working level with our communities, again, so that we can actually make sense of what we're actually talking about.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
What you have in front of you, the numbered page, that's what we presented to the FinCom of Charlton, and there were 2 selectmen involved in that presentation. So that information was, and we exceeded our allotted time to present the fiscal year '24 budget to FinCom in Charlton. So that information, they had it in their hands, it was readily available. And Mr. Matthew and I have had endless meetings with town administrators and town leaders to talk about this. And, you know, is it always about, you know, the department heads? No, it's not always a discussion about department heads, but it's about the assessment, the value, and where we stand. So again, that presentation that's numbered is, Charlton FinCom has had that before February break, with the consequences of, you know, or having to reduce our budget by $2.7 million. And respectfully, through the chair, if you don't mind,
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like I'm talking a lot tonight.
No, I think we all need to.
I think what's different though, and if you listen to, if we, at the Dudley meeting, you know, it's a struggle because 10% of their budget, they're talking about things that are really important for them, credentialing, going to a class, but also just operating in their office, you know, paying cartridges, and then we walk up and talk about a $2.7 million reduction. No department in Dudley has numbers like that, so it's so hard to try to correlate those things together. You know, you got 2.7 million, oh, you can spare the change, you can spare the money.
Well,
So
Dudley did also talk about reduction in police and fire and
They did,
staffing.
but again, their values, their 10%
Right.
reductions will never reach $2.7 million.
Correct.
So it's hard for the community and for
Right.
people to understand that, again, our budget is in essence the 2 towns combined, you know, a little bit under that in their operating budgets. And it's hard for people to conceptualize a $56 million budget for the schools when the town budgets are so much lower than that. And you know, with $56 million, you must have money, and that's why we continue to present that we are a third municipality. We take care of all the benefits, we take care of the retirees, we take care of, you know, and that's, you know, we have over 300 retirees that we're providing support and services for. It's just, I can understand that the complexity and understanding municipal financing and our school financing and how those things get tied together as a value. But right now, we are very close to a assessment value for Dudley and for FY '24 that ties into this override that's very different than where it was last Wednesday.
Yes.
So, but we appreciate all of the discussion around this because we do need guidance. And again, if you think of something else that's not on the lists we're trying to present that we work with our administrative team on, you know, we'll take, if you think we should cut every supply line down to 0 and not have any teaching supplies for next year, to save a value of $400,000, $600,000.
No.
Well, I'm kind of making up a number that's close to this number here.
Yeah.
But
Right.
It
But
would
if you-
it would be significantly less than that.
Yes, but if you wanted to do that to add into this pile here, those are the choices that we're living with right now. We don't have places that we can go other than increase class size, like I said, level, zero fund the supply lines, music, department heads, sports. And if you think to lower the $600,000 for Charlton's assessment next week, the above list, the 31.4 FTEs that administrative team came up, if you think those are some that you'd like to try to add to that to try to lower that assessment to 1.9 or even a little bit lower than 1.9, if somebody said that, I mean, we'd certainly take a look at that. I mean, that's the direction we're looking for from you as a committee.
Again, it probably goes without saying, but when there's no more fat, it's a question of which bone are you going to cut?
And I think that the depiction that you have in this this override document, in the blue box, tells exactly what the picture is of what the ask is for the additional cost for the year from where we were last year. And every single one of them is, there's nothing there that can come off of that list.
No, we're now limping into technology at $75,000, which is literally limping into that to try to get into some evolution of our technology.
Oh, and I guess to the point that you just made about these 31.4 FTEs that are on that page 10 again, I thought that our last meeting we had discussed, I thought Kathy actually asked what that actually was, so that we could flesh it out a little bit more to understand it. I mean, Shepherd Hill Regional High School 8 FTE doesn't tell us what that is to know the impact.
Right, so so that memo that I presented to the Dudley's Board of Selectmen in their FAA with the blue box on it does describe things a little bit more. Again, it is still a very lengthy process to try to determine exactly where the cut will end up. But I did try to talk about some bullet points as to what an unfavorable vote will do. You've already heard me say that it fundamentally changes the experience for students. You've already heard me say that. And you've already heard me say it's a clear movement to compliance and what's regulatorily required for us as a district. And also, we have been working, as we've done every year, trying to work around that classroom and make cuts around that classroom. So that's your starting point. How are we making these reductions around that particular classroom as best we can? And keep in mind, post-pandemic, this was not a year of relief. It's a year of excitement that we came back to school, but it's not a year of relief for our staff. And so we've had to add more mechanisms in place for our students within our particular schools. So think about what that would be without me actually naming that to you, those reductions would be. And then the second to last bullet is the greatest impact, and I've kind of talked about this, and so I want you to think about it as you as a committee have really been working on understanding UDL in Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. And the way I presented this to the selectmen the other evening is these reductions will really impact Tier 2 for us as a district. Right now, Tier 1 is a general ed classroom. Tier 3 you have to look at as being specialized instruction, a specific program for our particular students that receive services. Tier 2 is really those ramp-ups and those opportunities for students to, we've identified a need in our students. We provide them with an influx or infusion of intervention, and then we shift them back and forth within the Tier 1, Tier 2. So our reductions that we're presenting here are really hitting the Tier 2 very hard for us as a district, so we will be kind of left with a Tier 1 to Tier 3 continuum. There won't be, Tier 2 will be impacted in the middle of that. I think that's the most significant thing. So through your work understanding what Tier 2 may be, that is really a lot of what these reductions look like at this point in time. So to add a little bit more flavor for Shepherd Hill, we're looking at support systems. So that's staff that are involved in support systems around the classroom, that there are departmental decisions in there, which will also impact course selection and access for students to certain courses. Middle school, we've already talked about sports, and we're clearly saying foreign language on there. That's definitely recommended in here to get to an unfavorable vote of $2.7 million. And then the principals will look at departmentally where they can make reductions without impacting the gen ed classroom. So that's other, whether you want to call them special areas, support services, that they're going to look in that. But again, there's still a process. Today's not the day to continue to try to identify that, but there will be additional reductions in that area. Elementary, library assistants, which we've talked about before, that's 2 FTEs, so 6 FTEs will come clear from Tier 2. There's nowhere else in elementary school to reduce staff to try to prevent any action on the instructional classroom, general ed classroom. So you have to think about who has a role in a Tier 2 support for students that are in the general ed classroom. That's where those reductions will have to come from. We don't, again, unless you want to increase class size and keep the Tier 2 support services in there, that's a decision that has to be made. District office, we've talked about that. We talked about the assistant superintendent position. That's 1 out of the 3.4, so 2.4 would have to come from other roles within the district office. That will decimate the district office. You will have a barely, it's barely functioning sometimes now, but you'll have a barely functioning district office with a 3.4 reduction in there and with the staff that's involved in our district office at that point in time. But we have to be players in the game. We can't reduce from schools without reducing from our district office. So we're in this together, and we're going to be in this together. And then special education, I talked about before, those are obviously services and support. That's fluid. That's as of February 1st. We're still hanging on to it around March 1st, but that's fluid. That could change at any point in time. So that adds a little bit more description to it without saying that it's Steve Lamarche who teaches X as being the reduction. So I think the biggest point for me is it really compromises all the work we're doing around Tier 1, Tier 2 instruction so that students don't move from Tier 1 right to Tier 3. And that's, if we don't want to impact class size, if we don't impact the general education classroom, we have to keep nipping around that classroom, and those positions are the ones that are at risk.
My concern about targeting Tier 2 is we're gonna, like you said, we're gonna drive either Tier 1 or Tier 3. And with cost avoidance, which we've tried, by driving those children that need additional support into Tier 3, we're just gonna increase these obligated, regulated costs. So just like the example you provided with early intervention being delayed during the pandemic, and now these preschoolers are coming and requiring so much intervention because they didn't receive it prior to turning 3 years old, we're going to see that in our students over the next few years by targeting Tier 3. So that's a concern. I mean, I've seen it with my daughter. She received Title I, she got moved back into general ed. She went a few more months, she received Title I. She never required Tier 3, but every once in a while she would require a little extra support and then be fine. There's a lot of kids like that. And so eventually, if she didn't receive that support, she could eventually, maybe years down the road, be pushed into Tier 3, and then we don't have an option. We have to pay that bill, you know? So,
Yep.
I mean, it's a fix for now, but 3 years down the road, it's gonna be a bigger number that we're paying for special ed.
And not outside of the cost of that, it's a disservice to the student.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
an educational direct impact
Yes.
to that student.
It's tremendous. Our staff has been working extremely hard in our buildings on Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, UDL, and having that fluidity between Tier 1 and Tier 2 so students don't automatically move to Tier 3. We're really taking that away. That tool, that process, that instructional strategies away from our staff, and, you know, we're kind of tying their hands to an extent. So yes, we're impacting the student, there's no doubt about it, but in 2 or 3 years, our budget will be exploding with regulatory required positions that we have to continue to add without Tier 2 supports.
And to add, even the pediatricians in the area recognize that Dudley does provide this Tier 2 service. Because with talking with the pediatrician, when I explained what is being provided in the school, they're like, they're already doing everything we would recommend. So a lot of times, these kids are provided services before they even get a diagnosis sometimes. So that's my point, is like, yeah, eventually it might catch up and they get pushed into Tier 3 still, but it might not happen if they have intervention, just like EI provides for whatever ages, up to 3.
I think Madam Chair, I think it's a great point, and I think what I've recognized in my 4 years here is Dudley Charlton has always invested in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
This will be, in my first 4 years, this will be a change in that investment.
Mm-hmm.
And I you know, I don't want to say Dudley Charlton can't come back from it, but I want to say that Dudley Charlton, this is why I say it will fundamentally change the student experience in our schools, because the communities of Dudley and Charlton have always invested, the classroom has always been the center of the universe. It's always been paramount. With an unfavorable override and some work that we have to continue to do on the assessment for Charlton, that will change that investment for the first time that I've seen since I've been here, but even before I've been here.
Before are we all set for that point? And then
Yep, there's no
we were
vote
talking,
tonight, no.
right, we were talking about upcoming town leadership board meetings.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we crossed the Ts and dotted the Is with that, because it's we talked about March 9th is when the community of Dudley would like a number to vote on for an override. We do meet on March 8th to try to see if we can work to provide that to them. And then March 20th is if it doesn't work for March 9th, March 20th is another Dudley Board of Selectmen and FAA meeting to continue to work on that.
Okay.
You as a committee have scheduled March 22nd as a community forum for both communities to talk about the impact, which will be an assessment impact as well as the override impact. We have been working with the Abrams Group to, again, with the new numbers now, update his presentation and come to that forum on March 22nd. And then April 25th is obviously the ballot. So there could be other meetings in between there. We don't have a meeting scheduled yet with the Town of Charlton Board of Selectmen or FINCOM, but we have been working with the town administrator to either try to schedule a formal or informal meeting with members of the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Selectmen to really continue to have this open dialogue regarding their assessment in the FY24 budget for Dudley Charlton Regional School District. We have a possible date, but it hasn't been confirmed at this point in time.
Okay. Can I ask a couple questions about the community forum on March 22nd? Typically Charlton would be our next location on that March. I'm worried about space availability as far as auditorium space.
At Shepherd Hill?
No, we are having it
Oh.
at Shepherd Hill, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm wondering if, when we had our forum in the past, we had a moderator from Charlton that volunteered to help us out with that. And we may, I don't know if we may need a moderator or not. Does the committee have any questions about that, or?
You don't think that this building could support a community forum?
We're going to get into the yin and the yang. Yes, we get the impact on Charlton, and the assessment is new information for Charlton, et cetera, but the override's in Dudley. The ballot is in Dudley.
Well, and I think Shepherd Hill happens to be our school that includes both Dudley and Charlton students. And to me, that's a common ground. I don't know. You obviously don't feel that way. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I just think that we go back and forth typically, and the impact to Charlton right now seems to be where we need to make some inroads.
But we also don't have a pass to override. So I feel as though Dudley needs the pass to override. I mean, I know both towns are included in that, but I think there's probably going to be a lot more interest in that forum from Dudley. I don't know.
I suppose the only other thing I can add is that when we had our all boards meeting the last time, it was here, correct? So,
Oh, this is a community forum.
I know, but we're expecting we're expecting we would probably have attendance by
Both
our
towns.
boards and committees.
Right. I would hope that if we're having community forum about our budget and we're thinking about such detrimental effects to our budget, that we have a packed house. And I want to make sure that we have the spacing allowed to do that.
Okay.
Madam
That is
Chair,
my only
to provide
concern.
clarity too, this is a Dudley joint meeting with us, because it's a joint override. It's not just a district, it's
Right.
not just a district presentation dialogue. It's the town of Dudley as well.
Okay,
For
so
their
then,
voters and residents.
this was originally just a joint meeting with Dudley, and now we're bringing
No,
in
no,
Charlton?
because we're the only entity between the two towns that is shared between the two towns. So because the override impacts our school system, we want Charlton to be there as well.
Okay,
But it is a town of Dudley override.
okay, and we're focusing on more so about the override? Or what-
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah, without question, but we know that there's an impact on Charlton as well.
okay. Okay.
what is the date? Do we meet with Charlton again in their FinCom? What was that?
We don't have
We don't have
a confirmed date at this point in time.
Okay.
Was March 16th, is there something, or was that a tentative, or that was, I don't know why that was, that number.
That was a date thrown out for a potential meeting with boards in Charlton, but has not yet been confirmed.
Okay.
I don't know about anyone else, I am not able to make March 16th. Does anybody else have that availability? Just in case you are still looking for that date?
I think there are some school functions, but I told you that when we got here, that are already taking place on that day.
So maybe that's why it's not set in stone yet, so.
Okay. All right. Not that we don't want to meet with them. I think we should. Okay. I want to make sure if there's anyone, we talked about having CPAC come up and share their thoughts, and obviously you're welcome to do that at the budget hearing as well. But please come up. Thank you, Mr. LaFerrier, for
you, Mrs.
entertaining our.
First, I want to say, I can tell we're in a budget crunch because I am freezing and the heat must be down.
I saw you with your blanket.
I was over there freezing. Thank you for having me, and I have a personal conflict, so I can't be here next week. That's why I
Oh,
wanted to
okay.
come tonight. So
Perfect,
why
that's
I'm
fine.
here. Thank you. First time we say this is a good segue. The earlier discussion about Tier 1 and Tier 2 and Tier 3 was really helpful, and it brings into what I'm going to talk about tonight. For the members of the public that don't know who I am, I'm Kenny LaFerriere, Chair of the Dudley Charlton CPAC, and I'm here to provide some input on fiscal year '24 budget. I realize there are many difficult decisions that need to be made each year regarding the budget. But this year, it is especially heightened due to the serious financial situation the district finds itself in. For those of you who know me personally, I have always been an advocate for all students, not because we have to provide an education, but because it's what our students deserve. That being said, I believe it's especially important to speak tonight on behalf of those students who are really in the middle. We're talking about that Tier 2 grouping. School provides students with so many things, as you may know, and to be clear, I'm talking to the school committee tonight, but I'm also talking to the public. School provides students with so many things outside of the classroom setting. The ability to support the whole student is essential. A general education student that perhaps needs some extra support services to excel is imperative so their needs can be identified and remediation efforts put into place so gaps do not widen or get worse. As was discussed earlier, we certainly don't want students to go from Tier 1 straight to Tier 3, and so the surrounding services in Tier 2 are essential. Additionally, those students who are enrolled in our special education programs need these additional support services so that more inclusive opportunities can be provided, and they can happen, and those students have the ability to have inclusive efforts in the general education environment. These students, just like all students, deserve a free and appropriate public education, just like anyone else. Removing Tier 2 interventions would be devastating to special education in the district, While yes, it would save money today, the repercussions would provide a catastrophic effect on the budget in later years, as the district would need to put increased funding in place to catch those students up, bring those students back, and that would be a regulatory requirement that the district could not avoid. So I don't see the point in not investing now, because you're going to have to do it later. And those students should have been properly supported in the first place. This will definitely happen without the full financial support of both communities. Yes, we all recognize this is a lot of money. I would ask a question of all of us, including those at home. Do we really want to not give our students what they need and deserve? These are our kids, our families, our community. The question to ask everyone, What kind of community do we want to be? That is the question for all of us. Not just those of us here tonight, but also those watching at home, including those who do not have children in the district. What kind of community do we want to be? I encourage all members of the community to come to get involved, come to school committee meetings, but not just school committee. I'm asking the community to please reach out and connect with our respective town boards of selectmen and FinComs. Ask them the question, what kind of community do we want to be? From my perspective, and from the Dudley Charlton CPAC's perspective, the answer is clear. Choose to invest or change the story of the Dudley Charlton Regional School District. Thank you for your time, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
No, stay.
I didn't, I assumed
just
there was
wanted
no
to-
questions.
Nope, I wanted to thank you for coming. Does anyone have any questions? No. Okay.
Very good. And once again, my apologies, I can't be here next week.
No, thank you for coming this week. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Did we have anything else on our budget on our committee workshop? No? Okay. We'll just move on to next meeting dates. Those are there for you. So we have school committee next week at Shepherd Hill at 8 PM. No, I'm sorry. It's March 8th at 7 PM. And then budget and fine, yep.
Sorry, it starts at 6:45 with the,
Oh,
that's a
right.
typo, 6:45 for the public hearing on the budget.
Great, 6:45. Budget and Finance Subcommittee is going to be meeting March 6th at 9:30. Being video conference, policy review is March 10th at 9, video conference, and Curriculum Subcommittee for Teaching and Learning is March 6th at 1 PM with a video conference. Capital Outlay Safety Committee is March 10th at 11 AM with a...
If I may.
Yep.
I'm sorry, that date is actually March 3rd. It's this Friday.
The capital outlay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And the Shepherd Hill Building Committee is March 27th at 6 PM at Shepherd Hill.
Yes.
Great. Does anyone have any other meetings that we need to put on here? As far as our meetings? I think we've got them all, right? Okay. All right. And the future agenda items are listed, and I'll take a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second. All those in favor? Motion carries.
Was that Kelly's second? Sorry, I wasn't looking up.
Nope.